that if I wasn't doing well, if I wasn't picking a hard program, if I wasn't then excelling in that hard program, that I wasn't worth anything, right? Because when I had excelled and was playing professionally, whether it be theater gigs or with the big band or wherever in and around Atlanta where I lived at the time, it didn't matter, right? Because I felt that everyone else was saying that it was insufficient. One of those things is definitely that people are not valuable based on their utility to you. And I think that utility is one of those key hinge points. I think that it comes across in so many different types of dynamics, right? So whether it is about the utility of the relationship you had with your parents when they just needed you to be quiet and out of the way because their job or work performance was dependent on you not being a nuisance, whether it is the utility of, well, my wife cooks, cleans, brings coffees, does kids stuff,
she brings
whatever.
Coffee. I cook and clean. Thank you very much. But it's good to finally get a chance to chat to you one-to-one. Right. So today we're going to be talking about. We're going to start off with talking about how we define our value as people, which has already kind of come up a little bit on chat before. In fact, it comes up in one way or another in practically every chat. Why is it that was, when we discussed various topics offline, why was it that was such an important topic to you? Let's start there. So
obviously with the new year coming up, I had seen so many people posting about their accomplishments for the previous year and their hopes for next year. And I think it is really important that, you verbalize and you manifest, right? The goals that you have for yourself, as well as acknowledging the things that you accomplished previously. But I saw a lot of people kind of being, I think, a little bit hard on themselves. Like, well, because I didn't accomplish this, I am this. Right. And, I didn't meet this goal, some sort of self-deprecating comment. And honestly, to me, it seemed like that there were so many people who were in, honestly, quite an unhealthy place with themselves when it came to how they were viewing the work that they had done over the previous year and how they then corresponded to whether or not that meant something bigger about themselves. And so I think that for me, that's definitely been something that personally, I've struggled with in the past. And so seeing it, basically as I was just endlessly scrolling, I saw so many of these posts where on the one hand, something really positive, and they put a follow-up comment that was just wrecking everything. And I was just like, well, wait, hold on. We need to revisit this. But I can't do that in 140 characters with everyone, where how can we have a more meaningful and, basically a broader discussion about this issue that I saw kind of manifesting itself across the board, among a variety of peers that are coming from, all different backgrounds and walks of life. And so I just thought to myself, well, actually, this might be something that's worth discussing, because I think whether or not people were consciously or subconsciously doing it, it was just something I saw so much of. I was like, this probably bears discussing.
Yeah, absolutely. For yourself, you said obviously it's something that you felt in the past. And there might be, I imagine there are various stages to this, because if I was to answer this question, there's definitely stages to it. I mean, I know you're significantly younger than I am, but
probably not that much younger.
How old are you again? 27 or something? Thank
you. I'm going to be 32 this year.
What? I went for 27 because I thought you were 28. Well, you're going to be 32 this year. I'm going to be 40 in 6 minutes or something next month.
But we are in the same decade, so actually I'm not.
For now.
You're like, whoa. I'm literally counting down.
Oh no, it's totally not something that, it really wasn't on my mind until it was. And I was never bothered at turning 30 at all. And I didn't think I was going to be bothered at turning 40. Anyway, the whole purpose of that is for different stages in your life. So for yourself, where would you say that your idea of your own value has come from?
I think that's a really important question that we all spend the time reflecting on at some point in our lives. As I know that you've talked about before, I'm definitely a lurker, right? And in fact, I was ashamed to have to do my little offline follow, because I definitely followed you the first time you rated me with Adam. But we all know Twitch is weird, but I'm going to have to just throw this out there because I was just like, oh, wait a minute. But like you had taken some time off. So I was like, maybe I just haven't seen him in a while. And then I was just like, oh, snap. Because I am a lurker. Okay, I definitely.
For everyone that I've offline followed, that was exactly, I was like, holy crap, I don't follow you already. But because I don't know, I switched off all of my notifications. Like, so I don't know. Like for me, it's like, if I've not seen a go live notification on somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean I don't follow them, because notifications turned out to be the bane of my existence. But yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. I understand.
So it
from
was
one
the same.
serial lurker to another.
Yeah, I was like, oh God, don't bring this up. But anyway, I have brought it up, but because that's just kind of how I am. But anyway, so I'm definitely a lurker. But for me personally, I am someone who had very like high-powered, high-pressure parents. And so I think that when it came to defining my worth throughout my entire life, it was just very performance-based. You know, it was what am I producing? What am I being successful with? How successful I am, whether that be in, you know, just like in academic performance, whether that be in relationship performances. Everything was performative. Everything was measured. Everything basically had some sort of correlation between, if you are this good, then something this good will happen, or you are worth X amount to us as this successful being. And that was very much tied to, well, if you are failing, then we are failing. So, you know, no pressure. But obviously becoming an adult and removing myself from that situation, you know, as a teenager, I was able to open doors for myself and see, well, actually, there were so many toxic things here that, you know, while I can appreciate that my parents were wonderful professionals, I think they missed a lot of tricks as parents. I think that they tried their best, but ultimately humans are fallible. And I think one of the great moments that we have as we're self-actualizing as adults is to realize that our parents aren't perfect and that they're also just people, and that people mess up and people don't know everything, and that accepting that can be part of the healing process, you know, and learning to understand and move forward, you know, with yourself as a separate entity beyond understanding that relational structure between you and your family and that dynamic there. But it's also extremely difficult to move away from that. So I definitely mirrored a lot of the same expectations that they had put on me my entire life with myself, right? So just like, you know, we were watching in, you know, the ads that you had done, we sometimes are our own worst enemies. And we all know this, right? We put the most pressure on ourselves. We're our own worst critics. And we say all these things all the time. But how much do we really sometimes, I think, work to change, or at least to understand how that's affecting us? Yeah. So I think that for me was like a critical first step. And honestly, it just, I've only kind of just started that, I would say, really successfully over the past, I don't know, maybe 2.5, 3 years, not even maybe. It's kind of basically working back and trying to deconstruct a lot of those problematic and toxic mindsets, which I didn't realize were harming me in a very meaningful way. I just kind of thought, well, I need this ambition. I need this drive. I need to push myself. I need to work harder. You know, that grind culture, it was so much more than grind culture. It was like not only grinding, but you have to be successful to be worthy of anything, to be worth something, right? So yeah, I think that for me, moving through childhood, having to always be, you know, not only a sports star, but an academic, you know, standout, and, you know, to also be working and to check boxes for everyone around me. Then even when I removed myself from that situation because of other things that were going on, I still continued to implement that same system, that same worldview. And I think that obviously led to, you know, like, oh, okay, well, I made decisions which had opportunity costs. If I choose path A, I can't choose path B and such, but I was always choosing paths that were, you know, extremely rigorous, not necessarily the best for me, but because I was just desperate to be, you know, successful, to push myself, you know, to go and do things that were more and greater than who I thought I was or who I was. And, you know, it meant that I gave up things that I was passionate about, things that I really loved and cared about for the sake of success. And what did that really mean for me in the end?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. When you say, so you said obviously coming from the pressure, coming from all these different areas, was those the desire to kind of achieve academically and in sports and as a person, did they come from one person that was kind of putting this pressure on you? Was it multiple people putting different pressures on you for that?
I think it comes, excuse me, from multiple places, because I think that when, for example, when students are successful, right? So let's just say, you look back on your childhood, and if you were a student who was considered part of the gifted program, I think is what it was called in the United States in the 90s and 2000s, or here, I had the opportunity to go to private school, you get treated differently. People just assume that you know things and that you can do things, and that, you're fairly independent and that you don't need any help or nurturing. And that then suddenly, if you're not successful, it's somehow you have failed, as opposed to maybe something else is failing you. And I think that that's something that doesn't really get discussed. And, while I absolutely am in full support and agreement that, we do need to support everyone equally, that looks different for different groups. And so if you have groups that are struggling academically for a variety of reasons, whether that be due to social constructs, whether it be due to, learning difficulties, or whether, somehow they aren't being supported by the structure itself, yes, absolutely address those. But in the same way that when you have students who apparently are succeeding, why do we just then leave them?
Yeah.
We go, well, they're successful, right? So everything must be fine.
Yeah, we've got a limited amount of resources that we need to kind of dedicate over here, and these people are all, gifted, and therefore they'll be okay. They'll be okay. They're the ones we don't have to worry about. It's like, well, maybe they're the ones you have to worry about for a different reason. And I suppose it comes down to it's equity rather than equality, isn't it? It's meeting the individual needs of a person that is there. Rather than everyone having equal needs, because not everybody does have equal needs, and at different times I can see how it would definitely go that way. I think I was we didn't have the whole same gifted program over here, but I was considered one of the brighter ones in my school, and I don't think I actually got any additional support whatsoever, and I was just left to get on with things. And then when it came to exam time, I failed quite horrendously, because I was just kind of, no one was telling me to do extra work, because I just got things. And so it was, I never really kind of thought about that process for me before either, actually. No, the reason I was asking about coming from different perspectives is one of the big things that I've found, with people who come into the channel, or people I've spoken to about this in real life, or even myself, it's about for my, let's say, so being able to perform academically was important to my mum. My dad, on the other hand, my dad was a musician, like a stand-up comedian, cabaret artist hybrid thing, which
that's amazing. It sounds amazing.
It was traumatizing at the age of 12. Yeah. However, it's something that I never really got to know him, because he died when I was 19 and stuff, and it turns out that about 80% of my personality was totally and utterly him. And I'm a complete and utter show-off / like to entertain / a bit of a diva. So it's the only place I can think of that it came from anyway. But his big thing was kind of he wanted me to kind of be musical. So he was really impressed whenever I did anything musical. But then was also very impressed when I stayed out the way and was quiet. My mum was running her own business back then, so she was very impressed when I wasn't interfering with that. And it's like, nobody ever sits there and tells us as a kid, this is what it means to be a good kid. But what they do is they show us what's important to them, or what their needs are at that time. So when, for my mum, her need was for me to do well in school and to kind of be a little bit more self-sustained, because she was starting a business, and literally she started that business to keep a roof over our head, because we were this close to, we'd had the car repossessed, we were very close to being out on the streets. So for her, it was that was what was important. And it wasn't until I had kids of my own that I actually sat there and was like, you know what, these kids piss me off sometimes, but and there's things that I want for them. One of them's watching right now, so I better be careful what I say. But there's things that I want for them, but actually their value as humans to me Like they don't have to do these things to be valuable. They have to do these things that I want to fit to because that's what I want or I need as a parent. But they don't have to do any of those things in order to be valuable to me. And then I was like, I wonder if like that's what I was like to my parents as well, because all this time I am such a people pleaser now. Because that's who I needed to be in order to survive growing up. You know, I always had to put everybody else's needs ahead of mine. My dad worked shifts and needed quiet. So when I was over at his, I'd only saw him for a few hours a week until later on when he was out of work. And during those few hours, most of the time he'd be off napping and like I'd be looking after my little sisters. So like that was me being useful there. So being useful equaled valuable in that situation. And with my mum, the business she'd started, she was working from home, and it was a small house in Liverpool. Like we literally, me and my brother would go downstairs, eat our dinner off the dining table, off the ironing board, whilst my mum used the dining table to run this business. And it was very much eat your food, back out, back to your room, be quiet, don't interfere. And that was what I kind of deemed as, okay, me needing to facilitate for everybody else, that was what I felt it meant for me to be valuable. And even though I've completely rationalized all of that in my head now, to think, actually, no, maybe I am still valuable to people when I'm not actively doing what they want, I'm still drawn towards it. If I'm completely honest, I still feel that pull. I still feel like I literally had this discussion with my wife the other day. Is like, I want some time where none of them are in the house, because when it doesn't matter if they're asking me for my time directly. When the three of them are in the house, I feel as if I should be doing something, and that's deep within me. That's my need to be valuable, and that's what it takes to be valuable. You know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. I think that, like I said, we become reflections, right, of what's demanded of us. So our behaviors are going to basically suit, right, the environment that we're in. So when, in your situation where basically what was being asked of you, in order for you to be a good child, a good kid in that situation, it was to basically be helping to meet the needs of your guardians, right? And wherever they were and whatever that was looking like, I think that is the opposite. I think, yes, our parents have needs, but ultimately it's just like, I'm not saying that anyone's needs should ever be ultimately subservient to anyone else's, but that just like, what sort of role are we looking at here? We're looking at the relationship and the dynamic between a parent and a child. I don't necessarily always understand, other than the fact that, yes, a parent's needs need to be met in order to better serve the child's needs, right? Because obviously they can't pour from an empty cup.
Yep.
But that, it reaches a point where you're like, okay, am I just neglecting my child's individual needs and their individual growth, right? And what they needed to develop, right, into a essentially more capable or, more well-functioning adult. And I think that for so many of us, with all of our variety of experiences, that didn't happen, right? Because how many times, right, do we hear about so many people's trauma experiences? And I definitely try to walk around just basically remembering that everyone around me at some point has probably had a trauma experience. So, when we say like, always be kind, that's easy to put in a tweet, but like, are you doing that? Are you actively trying to consider that it might not be just you who's had this terrible experience? So like, in my case, yeah, absolutely. I definitely only felt like that I had any sort of value or worth if I was bringing home top marks, because my parents would say all the time, well, we send you to this really great school, you have to succeed because we're doing all of this for you. We sacrifice for you. So therefore, you have to perform. And if you're not succeeding, then you're failing us. And I think that is something that's put on a lot of people in a variety of different ways. But for me, that was just my personal experience, which was that if you don't succeed academically, if you're not involved, if you don't make a bunch of friends, that you are failing. Right.
Yeah.
That was really difficult for me. I received my autism diagnosis when I was really, really young. It was nonverbal. I really struggled. And my parents just didn't want me to be a weirdo. And so, what did that mean? It meant that, there were in the 90s, a lot of very controversial ways that autism was being treated. It definitely was not being treated well in girls because they weren't looking at autism in girls like at all. And so, it was difficult, and there were some very testing and very trying experiences, especially as I became older and a teenager. I was really pushing back against a lot of those structures, as many of us do. But yeah, definitely it was that not only not receiving support from structures that should otherwise be supporting you when parents are failing you, but then having your parents ultimately kind of fail you in their own way. But then having that reflected back on you as though that's your failing. Like when you were talking about earlier, yes, there are two sides, but it doesn't mean that one side is 100% responsible. Obviously, there are going to be contributing factors that come from not just those individual sides, but all of the contributing sides as well. So it's not just the one coin. It's that you have a pocket full of change and then so you just threw it up in the air, and we don't know whether or not they're going to land on heads or tails and how that's all going to pan out. But ultimately, if you have all of these contributing factors, you have an entire context that's going on around the individual. All of these things are basically fostering the individual in both negative and positive ways. And so when you become an adult and you're trying to define, okay, who am I? What am I doing? What do I want to do? What does it mean to be existing meaningfully? I think a lot of the times what you fall back to are your earliest experiences of constructing your self-worth. And for many of us, our earliest experience of constructing our self-worth is dependent on our relationship with our parents, because they were our very first relational dependency. And it's also, very unfortunately, our very first codependency in many ways, which, needs to be balanced more by the parent, ultimately often isn't. And so you're in your first understanding, your first view of the world is often through their lens, because you reflect characteristics of your parents. And so then when you turn that lens on yourself, the same lens that they see you through, that's how you look at yourself as well. And I think that can have very long-lasting implications to the overall health and growth of an individual, that we have to take time to be like, is this me? Or am I basically looking at myself through another's lens, a lens that they're looking at me through? And would that be what I see if I remove that lens from my vision?
Yeah. 1,000,000%. I just know I think that's personally absolutely spot on. It's so much comes down to like the expression of "you are enough." Like, what does that mean to an individual? And I constantly ask people now, okay, what does it take for your friends to be enough for you? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is like, oh, they just are. Like, even with people who have difficult relationships with their parents are still enough in their eyes, right? It's like, they still love their parents unconditionally. The kids, siblings or whatever. What does it take for that person to be enough in your eyes? They just are. But it's very hard for a person to then say, well, that means I am too. And we discussed this about 4 weeks ago, where someone said that they only felt like they were being useful, like they were only enough when they were being actively useful. And that's something I can relate to, because I had that exact same feeling a few years back. And my way of rationalizing that was to say, actually, the people in my life that are enough to me, like, do they need to be being actively useful? It's like, no, they just are for who they are. And if someone's done something actively useful for me, does that stop being useful to me as I move on? I still think back to one of my mentors, who's someone I've not spoken to in months now, but a piece of advice he gave me 6 or 7 years ago, actually, which weirdly is on this same topic. I said, I wanted to be like him. He's an educator, and I wanted to kind of do conferences and speak and do things like that. And I said, how do I do that? And I was asking for the practical, logistical, how do I do that? As in, how do I find my first booking? How do I do this? And what he said to me was, he's like, you need to decide you're an authority and not wait for anybody else to tell you that you are. And it's almost the exact same thing here. It's like, when it comes to being enough, it's like, you need to decide that you are and stop waiting for somebody else to tell you are. Because when somebody else tells you are, they're basically saying you are through my filters of what it means to be enough. And what we've kind of sort of seen there is that, yeah, okay, your mum might have wanted one thing for you, your dad wanted something else, your sports coach wanted something else, your maths teacher wanted something else, your best friend wanted something on top of that. It's like, and it's the thing is that we might be able to, there's that expression of, you know, you can keep some of the people happy some of the time, and you can keep some of the people happy all of the time and all the people happy some of the time, but you can't keep all of the people happy all of the time. So it's like, you're like, okay, which one of these things? I've got like 7 different people in my lives who all need their needs being met, and how do I even do that with that many people?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that, I mean, we still go around using these metrics on people, even when we don't mean to, right? So for example, what's one of the first things that as an adult, right, when you're out meeting people and you've been introduced, right, what's one of the first things that comes up in conversation? It's always, what do you do for work, right?
I love answering that question.
You're like, let me tell you. I think one of the very first things that often comes up as an adult is people always ask you, they go, oh, you know, Cry, very nice to meet you. I'm such and such, blah, blah, blah. And they always go, what do you do for work? Now, I 100% used to be like, let me pull out my CV, right? Because I'm a political scientist by education and practice. And so for me, I used to be like, yes, and I've written and I've published and I do all these things, and this is my stuff, and this is where I was educated, and this is where I did my postgrad. And I could just be like, bang, 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 right? And it was something where I used that as a way, right, to basically put shiny badges on my chest.
Yep.
To be like, I am worthy. Acknowledge me. Acknowledge how hard I've worked, acknowledge how smart I am, acknowledge the good that I do in the world, acknowledge me. And that's ultimately what I was doing, was trying to justify my existence simultaneously in their space. Like, I am allowed to exist here with you. Let me prove it.
Yeah.
Right. And ultimately, that's what I was doing. I'd be like, let me tell you about my work. Let me tell you, not necessarily because I was just passionate about it, because that honestly took a secondary role. Right. It was more that if people asked what I did or where I studied, I used those accolades to try and prove to both them and myself that I was allowed to be in that space.
Yeah.
And I think that that's more difficult now, because I find myself, you know, basically research grants dried up. I'm no longer working at the university or going to university anymore, you know, abandoned my PhD. Was just like, I'll just take my master's and run. And, you know, and that became something that was hugely undermining for like how I personally felt about my self-worth.
Yeah.
Where my whole life had been on track to do certain things and it had been derailed previously. So, I don't know, super long story short, take a guess at what my very first undergraduate diploma is in. Just I want to go some plumbing. You know what? I probably would have enjoyed something with my hands. I'm not going to lie. It's actually in jazz performance, and I was a saxophone player.
Well, that is with your hands.
Technically, also my mouth.
And it's made out of a
Don't
pipe.
get spicy, chat. Don't get spicy. I see where this is going. Don't get spicy, chat. But yes, I loved it. I love jazz. I played professionally. I absolutely was so passionate about it. And then people around me were like, yeah, so I mean, you're going to be mostly unemployed, but I hope you have a good time. And I was just like, oh God. And so then I was just like, oh no. Okay. So I went back to university, right? And I did international affairs and East Asian studies. It's like a dual major. So it was basically like doing 2 degrees at once. I had to do internships abroad, studies abroad, like all this other stuff. And I was so proud of that, because it was an incredibly difficult degree at a top university for that program. And I was just like, look at me succeeding, right? Look at me succeeding. And I held on to that as a way that I personally was measuring my own worth, right? That if I wasn't doing well, if I wasn't picking a hard program, if I wasn't then excelling in that hard program, that I wasn't worth anything, right? Because when I had excelled and was playing professionally, whether it be theater gigs or with the big band or wherever in and around Atlanta where I lived at the time, it didn't matter, right? Because I felt that everyone else was saying that it was insufficient, that this was not worth enough for me to be doing, because they'd be like, oh, you're so smart. I don't understand why all you're doing is music. What, like, jazz isn't incredibly difficult? Okay, fine. Like, being a musician isn't incredibly difficult and doesn't require rigorous practice and tons of theoretical study and a bit of just understanding of music and talent generally. But okay, fine. But I abandoned all of that. Because I felt that others were saying that I wasn't worth enough being a musician. And so I went back, I did something else. And then I noticed that people were like, yes, this is what Cry was meant to do, right? This is where she can make a difference. Look at all the good she's doing. And I received all this praise, right, from everyone who was around me, who was saying, yes, this is worthy of you. You are worthy of this. You're making positive contributions. You're succeeding. Look at the difference you're making in this field. Oh, look at the work you're doing on this particular subject. This matters. You matter because your work matters, right? And those two things became intimately tied. That the only way that I mattered was if my work mattered. And I think that that's true for a lot of us, because we're told our whole lives, do something meaningful, do something that you love and that you care about and you're passionate about, and that will basically give you personally meaning, i.e. meaning equaling worth, that your life will be worth something because you're doing something meaningful.
Yeah. For anyone who's just listening to the podcast version of this, I have had some very interesting facial expressions over the last 10 minutes or so, because, Cry is preaching pure fire here, but also preaching things that we've probably all come against. We've probably all come against that whole, doing something for someone else's approval, or what makes, what other people find important. It's like I was at my mum's 69th birthday party a few weeks back. Yes, jokes were made.
Rightly so.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Keep her young at heart. Keep her young at heart.
Exactly. And since, my mum, again, she's absolutely made up because of the fact that I work for the NHS now. And that's what's for anyone who's on the podcast who doesn't really know, or for anyone who's listening who doesn't really know, I work for the NHS 1 day a week, and I'm helping write an education program to deliver in schools for kids about mental health. So my mum's super impressed about that, which, I think it's a reasonably impressive thing, because kids need mental health education. So yeah, that's cool. But the reason my mum's impressed about it is because it's for the right noble establishment of the NHS. It's like, I've been educating kids about mental health for 4 years through streams and through content online, but my mum doesn't understand. Oh my God, I'm gonna say it, aren't I? Doesn't understand being an influencer. I feel so dirty. Oh my God. Right, that's out my sit. No, it's not. I still feel, oh God, I feel like I've got worms under my skin. So my mum doesn't understand the concept of being an influencer, or obviously, doing something on Twitch for tips. Which mostly means doing stuff on Twitch for free. So that's again, it goes back to the same thing, of that's what's important to her. And in reality, it's when I talk to people, it's the fact that for 11 hours of so basically I work for the NHS 1 day a week, which is about 7 days. I stream for 7 hours. I stream for about 11 hours a week, where again, it's not a dependable income. It's not something that I turn up to for the sweet cheddar. But I sit here and we talk mental health, and we provide that. Now, I would say that I probably reach more people in that time, and I can help directly with more people in that time, and we create a space for more people within that time. So it's in the terms of worth, it's they both have individual worths and both have individual values. But my mum sees the worth in the NHS thing because that's a worth that she understands, and whereas I kind of feel a little bit more of the worth in this thing, because generally speaking, I go in, give a talk to a bunch of kids, never hear anything about it ever again. Whereas we talk to the community here, and then we get feedback, and we make relationships, and there's completely different value there. But as a slight note as well, going back into the musical thing, is like, I used to be a musician myself. I still am, because I can still play. But I used to be a full-time musician in a band. I was the guitarist in a hip-hop band, if you believe it. And again, like, no one really saw the value of that because we weren't big, we weren't signed or whatever. And it's like, all these signed bands that you love, like, they were unsigned at some point. But like, I look at that and I think about the fact that, okay, I never got to make it big with a band. However, I've had, 4 or 5 friends have me play the music at their wedding. I have played people down the aisle. I have played both on a guitar and a piano, not at the same time. And again, it's like, this is where did you find the value in that, in all those hours spent learning the piano and all those hours spent learning the guitar? Like, where did you find the value in that? Not to mention the fact that I still love it. It's still therapy for me. I still pick up that guitar. The last stream before Christmas, I picked up that guitar and we sang Christmas songs really shittily. And we made up an anti-Christmas song as well for those who don't really like it. So the value in all of these things goes far beyond. Like, for me, the value in each one of those things, I, at one point in my life, was judging it by the fact that, yeah, they were probably right. I wasted all my time doing that. It's like, now I look back and I'm like, no, I didn't. I didn't waste my time in any of that at all. I got the skills I had there allowed me to play for this person's wedding. The skills I had there allowed me to kind of entertain people this way, or even just share a song with people on stream now. And like, it's, those skills that we learn, it's interesting what people think when we change direction. It's like, you don't just lose those skills. Like, you didn't forget how to play that saxophone the second you put it down. Sure, if you've not practiced for a while, you might be a little bit rusty, but you'd soon be back to where you were. And it's not gone. You've not like completely closed the door on the saxophone and opened it on political sciences, and then completely closed the door on political sciences and opened it on playing Horizon Zero Dawn. It's like, it's those skills, that information, that knowledge, all those things are all completely still there. And actually something that you can always draw on as well. We're a culmination of everything we've learned and everything we've been through. Like, that, those skills would still be useful for you. Now, things that you learned through jazz musicianship actually would help you today. Like, they can help you in the way that you process your thoughts, or like the way that you put things together with like analogies and stuff. It can help you be relatable if someone comes into your chat and is actually going through that exact same thing now. It's like, it's all still there and it's all still useful.
Yeah, there's so much. And I think that one of the main things that like I've taken away from kind of the different points in my life where I've redirected. So I know some of you here, like obviously Lindsay, Robin, and a few others that, like they know that I have lupus, right? I didn't always have lupus. I know somebody in chat earlier was talking about having chronic illness. Yeah, I get that. And I'm sorry that that's what you're experiencing. I relate to that 100%. It's one of those things where I definitely made a Hugh Laurie, Dr. House joke when I was being diagnosed. I was like, it's never lupus. And she was like standing there with her clipboard, like, please sit down. I was like, no. So, it's one of those things I laugh about, but, like I was all set to take my first undergrad degree in IA and East Asian Studies into the military and being a military intelligence officer. I was a top cadet and I went to, basically an officers training school. And like, I was on track, right? I was on track. And, my life was very different. And then I had my lupus diagnosis and I was like, oh, okay. So I see we're making another hard left. No problem. I guess we'll just change everything. And it was in those moments that I personally was very challenged, right? When it came to understanding what my worth was and then how I was connecting that to the world around me, right? So how I personally was defining it versus how others were defining it. And honestly, I had some really eye-opening moments that came through these very challenging times that in many ways kind of forced me to address the issue in a way that if I had just kept being successful, I would have never addressed. Mm-hmm. I don't like change. I don't want things to change. I mean, even when things need to change, I'm like, no, this is fine. Even when it is not fine. And so I think that, those challenges and hurdles that I came up against, honestly, even though they were very difficult at the time, were hurdles that I needed to overcome in order for me to kind of take those lenses off, that where I was seeing myself through the view of others and not necessarily looking at myself in a more objective way. And by objective, I mean literally just me, my perspective. Because when we say, objective and subjective, like, yes, of course, everything is technically subjective. I look at myself and it's technically subjective. But when I'm talking about this, it's objective in the sense that I'm not using someone else's subjective lens to view myself, right? Yeah. So it's objective in the sense that it's only me, myself, and I looking at myself, trying to understand myself and essentially reassess, because that's what I was essentially doing, was reassessing my worth. And coming to understand that that wasn't dependent on what I was doing. It wasn't dependent on how much money I was making. It wasn't dependent on who I was in a relationship with or how many friends I had or any of these other things, that I personally had intrinsic value just by existing. And that was something that, for me, my value had always been conditional on whether or not I was doing well in school, whether or not I had a good job, whether or not I was making lots of money, whether or not I did or didn't need anyone, was or wasn't in a relationship. I mean, so many things became conditional to me understanding my value. And I think that that's one of the hardest things to remove, right, is going to be the lens that we view ourselves through that doesn't belong to us. Mm-hmm. Like, this is someone else's perspective. This is someone else's judgment. This is someone else's metric. And really the only metric that should ever matter, right, is how do we value ourselves without any of those other things being involved. And that's what we have to try and love and support in and amongst our friends, but also most importantly with ourselves. And I think that that's something that gets ignored. When it comes to being on Twitch, I see this so often, right, where people kind of connect their whole personality, their whole value set, everything to the platform, where, they look at those numbers and they think that reflects who they are as a person, right? What's my viewer count like? What's my sub count like? What's my averages? How many followers do I have on all of these different platforms? And it can be very difficult when you see what appears to be your value laid out metrically. Yeah. And I think that being on Twitch, I personally, this is the one thing I've not struggled with. So it makes it hard for me to relate to others, because when they go, oh, well, you say you don't care about numbers, but like everyone cares about numbers. And I'm like, well, no, because I've kind of had this test before, right? I've been challenged this way before. And so for me personally, I know my value beyond the platform. Yeah. My personality is not Twitch. My value is not Twitch. Do I think that I augment? Do I think that I add value through Twitch? Yes, but it's a medium, right? It's a medium that is transmitting what we're communicating and, allowing us to connect, but it's not everything that I am. It's not everything that I'm going to be or do. And, I'm not basically putting all of my eggs in this basket. And when that stream review comes in after you click in stream and Twitch is like, hey, do you want to know how you did? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. Thanks. I think we did fine. Thank you, though. But of course, it's also, so then when you go, well, it's like a ham-handed transition to get to this conversation, but like, here we are, we're in it now.
This is all related, so it's fine.
You're like, no, don't worry. It'll be fine. Yeah. When you see people, mentioning like, oh, I hit 1,000 followers, it's important to celebrate that, but they're not saying that they're only that, you know? So it's like people have this, like zero-sum view of understanding metrics and using metrics and how they apply those metrics to themselves and what that means for their worth, either as, both a person versus the content creator and what they're doing online, and that those are connected, but they're not necessarily exclusive. Like they're not just the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, if I can fully relate to the obsession with the numbers thing, because it's something I basically love and then hate and then hate and then love, and then like it's because I used to have body dysmorphia, or possibly still do, who knows. So in that period I used to weigh and measure myself quite regularly, and it never scratched the itch. It just made me want to weigh and measure myself more, and I felt the exact same feelings when it came to looking at my numbers. Is the more often I do it, the more often I want to. It's like it becomes an addiction of like, and yeah, I suppose with having bipolar disorder, basically the easiest way to describe it is when I'm up here, I think I'm the shit, and when I'm down here, is I think I'm shit. It's like, so depending on where I am when I look at those numbers as well, can dictate whether I look at those numbers and they are data, or whether I look at those numbers and they are emotional. And ironically, not ironically, you said obviously you gave me the offline follow. I ended 2021 on 2021 follows, and then you were my first follower of 2022, putting me up to 2022 follows. So I love little things like that, and I'll be slightly hooked on when we get 2, 3, 4, 5, because I get really gelled up by sequential numbers. Like if I see 1234 in a day, it's a good day usually. I'm no superstition, just a little weird thing that I've developed. But yeah, it's for me, it's a case of I came into it looking at it from a business perspective. Is my business performing? Because this is a part of it. And the easiest way I'd say to people is if it depends. It depends if growth again is an important factor to you as an individual. Same as self-worth. You've got to sit down and say what does self-worth mean to me? What does success mean to me? What is my definition of success? Because it's a lot of people will be like, oh well, this amount of views or this amount of follows is their definition of success, and then we take that on as if it's the the objective, like we were talking about objective and subjective before. We take it on as if objectively that means success, and I'm like, actually no, your followers is just a number of potential connections. It doesn't actually dictate the quality of any of those connections. And like, I love having a conversation. I'm sorry, chat, I've not looked at you for like forever. I love having a conversation that makes me forget that we're live. I love having I love like speaking to one person in chat, and like, that's why you have the behind on chat joke in our channel. Is like I would much rather than get through every single message, I'd rather give value to each message that I speak to. So it's it comes into a state of, right, what is my success is actually dictated by the quality of the connections, or the number of quality connections. It's not just dictated by a number of connections arbitrarily based on regardless of what the quality of those connections was. If 200 people came into this stream today, which has never happened before, but hey, it could have happened for all I know. There could have been a raid while I wasn't looking at chat. If that happened today for the first time, my big thing would be like, was I able to kind of connect with each of those people well, or was I able to actually show those people the quality, or make those people feel welcome, or whatever it might be. I don't just want it to be, I got 200 people, yay, and then everyone was just like, what's this all about? And or like it's like you and I have chatted about this before. Is like as it's a bit different for me because I don't game on stream. I've taken that back, and it's my own downtime again now. But like the whole thing where your viewership changes when you change game, and it's like, and that leads us to ask, that's another question for streamers. It's like, oh, is it people coming for me, or are they coming for the game, or whatever it might be? It's a very interesting place to kind of get into. Where would you say your idea of value comes from now then? So you said obviously that joy after the lupus diagnosis and a few things forced you to kind of sit there and dictate that, you've tried to look at it objectively. Where would you say that your idea of what does being, how do I word this? What do you think makes you valuable now?
I honestly think it's still evolving. Like I said, I'm kind of very new from my emergence of understanding myself more metrically, right? So I've only just come out of the phase of being like, okay, I need to be successful in my career. Okay, I'm only valuable because I have these degrees, or my work in this field, or I've written on this subject. And like, it used to be that, that was something that I really felt like made me valuable as a person. I think that as I've moved forward and I've, had a lot more, like, I would say just, intimate platonic connections with people, what I've discovered is just that, like, just me is enough. So when I listen, right, when I'm communicating, right, when I am enjoying, essentially just existing, and, I'm happy, I'm making others happy. And it's not necessarily about, giving myself 100%, but it's just about being able to give and take in a healthy way with the people around me. I think that personally is adding value to my life. I would like to think it's adding value to their lives. I mean, they stick around, so I guess it's all right. And that's something that I enjoy in a way that I've not really, I think, ever enjoyed before in my life, is just understanding the way that I exist in the world is relational, right? So it's with other people, but it's not conditional, right? And that for me is key, that I believe that the way that we exist in the world creates value for ourselves, not by what we're doing, but just by who we are. And that's relational, right? Because we're connecting with other people in a variety of ways, on a variety of different subjects. But all of those iterations, every time we're communicating, every time we're experiencing one another, each of those moments is valuable, is meaningful. And then it's the collection of those moments that, for me, I'm holding on to as something valuable. So if we have our sort of like baseline intrinsic value, fantastic. I am trying to love and accept that about myself. But in the way that I'm adding value to my own life and to the lives of those around me, that's where I'm putting a lot of my focus on at the moment. And so, like I said, I think that my understanding of value is still evolving, but that is personally what I'm trying to focus on right now, as a way to kind of have, I think, a healthier relationship with values and with understanding my own worth.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I bring that back to thinking about what it means for somebody else to be valuable to me. And try to, it's like basically, like I'm constantly telling people to, you know, speak to themselves like they would a friend, and hold yourself to the same sort of standards that you hold other people to. And that can mean sometimes we hold ourselves to lower standards than we hold other people to. I mean, that can mean we expect more of other people than we expect of ourselves, and that's not healthy. But also when we expect so much more of ourselves than we expect of other people, that can be unhealthy as well. And that's like, you know, that's one of the big things is I'm always kind of focusing on, I've just got a coffee delivery. Thank you. I'm always... now my wife was just of value to me, you see.
Look at her bringing in me coffee.
I know, exactly. But yeah, she was still of value to me 10 seconds ago before I knew this coffee was coming. So that actually,
that's
weirdly,
the key point.
That's it. Yes, that is the key point. That like she isn't just instantly valuable to me for bringing me this coffee, and then as soon as this coffee's gone, that value is gone. And that's what. That for me to trying to determine where my value is, I have to be a little bit like that myself, because especially when I first got into coaching, it was like I felt valuable whilst I was on the phone to somebody, and then it didn't matter whether it was one person in a day or 10 people in a day. As soon as the phone calls ended, I'm like, I don't exist anymore. It's like, and again, the advice and the help that I've given to that person exists within their life long after that interaction. So therefore I continue to be of value to them. And it took me forever to get my head around that. And the same with streaming, especially when I first started, because when I first started, I only did one stream a week, and I couldn't, like, it was, if I felt I messed up a stream, it's like my next shot to do well and to redeem myself, not for another 7 days. I'm pretty certain that's why I started streaming 2 or 3 times a week. But it took me again at a time to be like, okay, no, I'm not, like, you know, I don't need to be there 100% of the time to be valuable. I'm not only valuable when I answer 100% of the DMs. I'm not only valuable when I do all this, because I wouldn't have those expectations on anybody else. And therefore it's not fair to have those expectations on myself. So the big one I'm trying to learn, and this is going to be my big goal this year, is not just speaking to myself how I would to somebody else, as being as compassionate to myself as I would, because actually what do I think my value is? My value is being compassionate to people. And I deserve a little bit of that too, probably.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I've definitely tweeted about it before, and it's one of those things where it's like, I don't tweet all that often unless it's just something that's either cute or funny, or then I'm at a boiling point and I just have to blurt something out. And
you sound like me.
Yeah. One of those things is definitely that people are not valuable based on their utility to you. And I think that utility is one of those key hinge points. I think that it comes across in so many different types of dynamics, right? So whether it is about the utility of the relationship you had with your parents when they just needed you to be quiet and out of the way because their job or work performance was dependent on you not being a nuisance, whether it is the utility of, well, my wife cooks, cleans, brings coffees, does kids stuff,
she brings
whatever.
coffee. I cook and clean. Thank you very much. We're not having that one. Get out there.
Hold on. Yeah.
Oh, and I do the kid stuff as well. But to be fair, they, she's their stepmom, so
yeah, you're like check.
Yeah, I'm basically, just amazing. No, anyway, sorry.
Dave's like, I'm super dad. Let it be known. But yeah, so I think that people's utility, right, is the one thing that we've kind of talked about. It is 100% not ever how you should define other people's value. Whether that is, and I think one of the other things that kind of needs to be mentioned in all of this is that it isn't just, sort of platonic works and friends. It's also in your romantic relationships, So if we've talked about, okay, well, how is my utility measured at work? Okay, well, that's technically a performance metric. Are you in fact doing your job? Yes or no?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
But are you your job? No. And that's the difference, right? And then in the same way that, like, okay, amongst your friends, if you have that friend who is the one who's a little bit flighty, a little bit impulsive, but they're the exciting one, and it's just like, okay, well, yes, they bring a little bit of spice in, or you've got the friend who's a little bit, neurotic, or you've got the friend who's a little bit of the planet. Like, we've all got different dynamics in our friend group, but they aren't just those things. They aren't just what they do for the group or do for you, the individual. And it's the same in our romantic relationships. If you've got a partner who maybe is the one who's working versus the one who's at home, or maybe struggling with a chronic illness or has COVID. And so, like, obviously roles change and flex in their dynamic. But, in the same way, I definitely know people who have gone into friendships or romantic relationships with a utility objective. And I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, they had worth beyond that, before that. Yeah. Before you had this use for them, they were valuable, right? Or the fact that now that they are more valuable to you because they have this use. Again, I never name names, but I just had a conversation with someone. And are we clear to be 18 plus?
When you can be 18 plus. I've not got the actual 18 plus thing on here, but
okay, well, this will all be very cushioned then.
I don't usually have that requirement though. I just don't have the 18 plus tag on because we've got a few members of our community that aren't.
So content warning, this does involve discussion of a relationship. No names will be named. There is a small amount of sexual content that will be discussed in the next 3 minutes.
And the saxophone comes out.
Yeah, and all of a sudden we're playing saxophone. a little saxophone, excuse me. Okay, so essentially I was having a discussion with a friend of mine. I will not gender anyone or name any names. And they were very, very pleased with themselves because essentially they thought, well, my partner has just said that they were really excited that I was willing to do thing X. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, I didn't know you were interested in thing X. We'd not talked about thing X. Yes, but they said that thing X is really important to them. I said, okay. Basically, as long as you guys have had that conversation and, you're willing and everyone is a consenting adult, fantastic. I hope you have a great time. Let me know if you have any questions or need anything. Thought that was the end of the discussion, right? Until I kind of heard a little bit of feedback later where their partner was kind of having a separate conversation with others, being like, oh, yes, well, person A, yeah, I finally got them to do thing X, blah, blah, blah. Now I'm going to stay with them. Whoa. Huge red flag. You just went from basically being like, I'm in a relationship, I'm in a partnership, I'm enjoying this person's company, dating exclusively, whatever, to now making whether or not you were staying with person A dependent on whether or not they would provide whatever X utility was to you.
which literally everyone's filling in the blanks with in their own sick minds right now.
Yes. All of you are like in your workbooks, like you were in grade school, like moving words down from your available word box to fill in this story. So I obviously, as the observer of said conversation, was just like, oh, excuse. Excuse. So obviously I was really upset by that. I was like, there was no way to misconstrue this, right? So I kind of double checked. I, checked in with some people who were, really like, hey, did you have a conversation with person B about what they said about person A in action X? And they were like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And they was all very locker room talk, which I definitely just stamp all over and was like, nope. So that was like a separate thing that I addressed. But getting feedback to person A, I was like, hey, how was your experience with action X? And they were immediately upset, immediately distraught. And I was like, right, let's spend some time. I'd like to listen. Tell me what you need to talk about. Basically, let's go through it. And basically what it kind of came down to was that, they basically only felt loved in this situation because they were performing action X. But then action X became the utility that was just intrinsically connected to their value to person B, and that person B was now kind of only interested in action X. And then it seemed that the rest of the value that person A had previously been bringing into that dynamic, into that relationship, was just out the window. Out the window, completely ignored, right? Because person B had achieved the purpose of that relationship. They had reframed the relationship around action X. Right. And now only viewed person A as being valuable if they were providing the utility. Right. This is a huge problem. Right. And it doesn't have to just be in this sort of coercive extreme case, but it happens all the time. Like, I'm here doing this podcast because I think it's important that we're having these types of conversations. Do I see terrible parasocial relationships happening between content creators and their communities, or content creators and other content creators?
Are you inviting me into a parasocial relationship here, Cry?
Join me in our parasocial bliss. Yes.
Oh yeah.
I'm here
parasocial relationships. Let's do it.
I'm only here for utility X. Didn't you know, Dave? Jeez.
Although, in the interest of reciprocity, thanks to you coming over here for being a guest for me, I'll do you a favor at some point.
No, don't worry about it. I'm here because I want to be here. It's one of those things where I think that too often people are treated as objects of utility, and I think that erodes our own personal understandings of our self-worth. I think it erodes the way that we view others. If you are chronically looking at people as tools, objects of utility, whether or not they fulfill action X, Y, or Z, like these are the types of things that become hugely problematic when we're framing how we view other people, how we view society, and how we just ultimately treat others. But I also think that it's very damaging to how we view ourselves, because again, if you're projecting that outwards, I guarantee you that you're reflecting it inwards. And I think that's equally dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. I think what you said before is important, because when we talk about someone being enough just exactly as they are, 1 in a million people will be like, oh, that means I don't need to do anything. Most people don't actually see it like that, but that's not to do with, again, it's not to do with the fact that we shouldn't actually provide some form of utility in our job or in our relationships or whatever it might be. It's just to do with that your utility and your worth are not the same thing. It's to do with being enough isn't dependent on how utilitous, that's so a word. If it's not, it is now. It shouldn't be based on that. But it is important to make distinctions but that doesn't mean you can go into a job, do literally fuck all, and be like, but I'm enough. So just, ka-ching, give me that cheddar. The same in a relationship. It's okay. I am enough, like, you know, I'm a pretty decent catch. But at the same time, like, that doesn't mean I can slack off from, like, putting the bins out forever, or, like, slack off from cooking and cleaning. Okay, I have managed to slack off from tidying this office for about 6 months now, which is quite nice. But because this is the one place I'm allowed to be dirty. I think I'm allowed to be anyway. Who knows? And there's one thing that I think you caught before we started the interview is we were talking about this idea that within every relationship, there are two sides, but it's not always 50-50. And I was basically talking about that in terms of blame, and, like, you know, within situations, it's like sometimes that are part of it, we are, you know, 1% to blame, 99% the other person. Other times it's vice versa. And actually, we sometimes think when we're younger, we're told it's always 100% our fault or whatever, and we can get stuck in that victim's mentality that everything's always our fault. And then sometimes we come out of that victim's mentality and go into everything's everybody else's fault. And it's like we lose complete perspective at both ends of that scale. Admittedly, that everyone's everyone else's fault. You'll probably feel happier for a little while. But the thing is, again, with a relationship, and whether it's a friendship or whether it's a romantic relationship, is this idea of, like, relationships should be 50-50. And I think that comes down to, like, when are you measuring this? How frequently are you measuring this? It's like, because okay, sometimes it's 50-50, sometimes it's 75-25 for like 6 months, and it needs to be. Like my wife's recently done some I should really know the name of it, some qualification in the insurance industry. She's an insurance person, right? I had to proofread it. It was really boring. I was like, you should proofread my work. And she's like, you don't type anything, you just speak. But yeah, so during that period, it was like, okay, I take some of the extra slack, and, like, you know, and do things there. And then theoretically, you know, during a period where things are a bit busier at this end, that happens occasionally, you know, like, then she takes some of the slack there. But it's not an every single day. We're not sat there at the, like, chalking it up and keeping score. It's like an overarching thing. And the same is actually true in most friendships. Is like, if a friend needs a little bit of extra help one day, or you need a little bit of extra help one day, that's not anybody being selfish. That's not anybody, like, you know, it's like, it's not, it only becomes issues when over time there's none of that reciprocity. There's none of that as well. And I think, again, people are very quick to jump to conclusions and to feel undervalued, especially if you've come into a situation with low self-esteem and with low kind of self-value. People are very quick to often jump into thinking, okay, this person maybe didn't value me because of this time that I was expected to do it. It's like, okay, long term, it's like, where, you know, understanding that long term, that actually, yeah, there is going to be give and take, and that's okay. But ultimately, sort of linking this back to the person A and person B and thing X, it's like, not on things that are complete and utter deal breakers.
As it turns out.
Yeah, like, and also it's okay. It's okay if someone else has that type of deal breaker. That's not necessarily about you. That's about them. That's like about it. Like, that's what's, and, you know, I think like the love languages come into it a little bit here. Is like, what's important to one person as to how they feel loved is not always the same as it is to everybody else. And some people show love in ways that are different than what they want to be showing love themselves. And it can be a bit of a minefield, but I suppose the point is, because I've gone off on a super tangent now, is that none of that equals your worth. None of it.
Absolutely. And I think that what that kind of comes back to, actually connecting this whole topic back to worth, I think really well, is communicating your needs as well. Yeah. So when we talk about our give and take, not everyone is going to give and receive the same way. And so if you're someone who, you know, for example, for me, what I have to give is my time, right? I'm unemployed, have been unemployed throughout the pandemic, have had some hilarious turn downs from employers. I mean, I share them because often they are comically bad and unprofessional. And I just think people should get roasted for that. but that, so what I have to dedicate right now is my time, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I give to others. And so I think that people kind of understanding and respecting that has gone really well in some spaces. In other spaces, people are less understanding. They would, in other spaces, people are like, money, please. And I'm like, well, sorry, you can just have me. I guess that's not enough. And I think that in friendships and relationships and things like that, whether it be with communities, whether it be with individuals, whether it be within your friend group, whether it be with a romantic partner, it can be extremely difficult, because if people are communicating their needs in a way, or demanding things to meet their needs in a way that is sometimes oppositional, right, to your needs, that then requires a difficult conversation, right? So if someone really, really, really needs to be communicating all the time, right? Or if somebody understands intimacy through different types of gratification, physical gratification, whether they feel loved and they experience intimacy through sexual gratification, whether they just need hugs or they're a hand holder, whether they need to be told, you mentioned the love languages, those are all very, very different approaches. But whether it be a friend or a romantic partner or, a group of people that you loosely know, everyone is communicating differently, right? But when people aren't listening, not necessarily to the words that others are saying, but their communication styles and to their needs of other people, you just end up at loggerheads, right? Where it's just like, okay, person A isn't meeting my needs, separate from story. Person A isn't meeting my needs.
It's not the same person A.
This is just a hypothetical person. Yeah. So if person A isn't meeting my needs, right, and people get frustrated or upset about that, and then they feel like that their worth isn't being respected, well, that can be difficult, because it might also be, like you said, when we were talking about whether or not both sides, is it 50-50? Are we communicating this clearly? Has there been a moment where we said, okay, I understand that this is what you need, but are you hearing what I need? Mm-hmm. So if you've got that friend who needs to be close all the time, but you're someone who needs a little bit of quiet time, a little bit of space, are they necessarily respecting that, or are they demanding your time all the time? And that then if you aren't fulfilling that need, they punish you by not giving to you the way that they were giving of their time, of their love, of their, whatever, right? So then do they punish you because you didn't meet their needs, but actually they weren't listening to your needs? And I think that can be such a difficult conversation. It could be such a fine line, especially if kind of both parties really aren't even part of the same coin. So whether we flip it or not, it doesn't matter, right? Whether that's 50-50 or not, it doesn't matter, because I don't think either realize that they're even in the same pocket of change. Like they have no idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's difficult, because understanding our own worth, communicating our worth, understanding our needs, communicating our needs, I think that these are very complex issues that I think sometimes it's easy to fluff up in mental health circles, right? I think that we're having a very real conversation about it. I think that other people are very easily tempted to be like, no, you're worth, but like, what does that mean? And, and be like, yes, your needs need to be met. What does that mean? Am I telling people appropriately? Am I communicating this well? Am I respecting the needs of others? So when you talk about specifically appropriate vibes only, that's so important, because it really is what we're actually discussing there. Is okay, we're saying we need you to kind of understand your own boundaries and understand the boundaries of others. That requires, a mutual amount of respect. It also requires listening and receiving as much as it does giving. And so that's about understanding your worth and your needs, but also trying to listen to and understand the worth and needs of others. And I think that sometimes it's very easy to get caught up in the rush and the hype of listen to me, listen to my mental health, listen to what I need. But it might mean that sometimes we completely ignore and marginalize the needs of others. And it means that we diminish the worth of others in lieu of our own. And it's such a delicate balance to find. And I honestly think some people never find it. And I think for like myself, it's evolving. right? As I mature and I try to understand more about this process and I try to understand more about the people around me, this is just an ongoing event that I try to just be conscious of. And I think that that's all that we can each do, is just be conscious of our own value and our own needs and the dynamics and how there's so much interplay with our individual contexts within our worlds, our bubbles, whether that be IRL or online.
Amazing. I think I was going to go off on another rant about boundaries, but I feel like you've just tied that up really, really nicely. Is there anything else that you would like to add on any of what we've said?
No, I think we covered it. I chat a lot. I'm sorry.
I love it. No, don't ever apologize. Honestly. If you happen to be free around the 3rd of June, I'm doing 36 interviews back to back on the 3rd of June over 36 hours. And I like people who chat a lot because it means I have to do very little. But we're doing something called the Mental Health Ultra Marathon, where I'm doing 36 back-to-back mental health marathons. And obviously, we didn't even get into mental health today. We talked, values are very much at the core of a lot of people's mental health. Your value, not yours specifically, but our value is very much at the core of a lot of people's mental health. But I would love to have you back and talk about that. One more question, because I just need to know, and it was supposed to be right at the very beginning, but hey, we got reducedly. Can you explain your accent to me?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. So basically, I lived half my life here in the UK and half my life in the United States. My mum rolled straight out of Gone with the Wind. She is so Southern American. It's ridiculous. But I didn't spend a lot of time with her. So I grew up mostly here. I was in Ashford in Kent, like in between Ashford and Canterbury. Now I live in Southwest. Like right outside of Bristol. I post about where I live all the time. This isn't really doxing myself. I live in Portishead in the southwest, so it's cider country.
Right, my lover.
Yeah.
Well, you've got to go do some scrumping, I have.
Oh no, God, scrumpy is rough. Scrumpy will kick your teeth in. But yeah, so so it's definitely a little bit different. Oftentimes I'm like, I have a lot of people be like, "Oh, you're Canadian." I'm like, "No, not Canadian. Thank you, though." But yeah, so I think for me, it was just like I worked really hard to change my English accent to be more American, because when I moved back to America, I really wanted to fit in. Really, really wanted to fit in.
So your accent is baseline English with the American put in. I always felt it was the other way around. No,
it's the other way, because I started here and then went back. So, I just like, I really desperate. I was just one of those people who kind of wanted to be invisible. Like, for me personally, I had this massive wall up between like who I was and what I was doing. And this definitely goes back into our self-worth conversation and like knowing your worth. So I basically put this massive dividing wall up between who I was as an individual and as a person versus what I was outwardly projecting about what I was doing, being like, I only wanted people to see me in my success. I only wanted people to see me based on what I was doing. And I didn't really want anyone to see who I was or what I was thinking, what I was feeling. And I was just extremely closed off. So I did my best to keep myself personally completely invisible. I just do not perceive me. So that was just one of those things where I worked really hard to change it, and now I can't fix it, which is devastating now that I'm back here. Because people are like, "God, what's wrong with you?" Like I've been kicked in the face by a horse or something. And I'm like, no, this is...
I was going to say, when obviously this is the most at length I've spoken with you, and when I'm in your channel, it's responses to chat and commentary on games, which is actually, once you get into your flow and you're given long answers, the American almost completely dissolves. And I was thinking earlier, whilst trying to listen to you at the same time, and I wish my brain wouldn't try and go on two trains of thought at the same time, but it does. I was thinking earlier, I was like, she sounds significantly more British today. And I always thought that you came from America and came here. I always thought it was that way around. And I've never asked it in your channel, and I suppose I could have just done. But yeah, I can relate it as well, because the reason I don't sound like this all the time is because I actually grew up sounding like this. Actually, I probably grew up sounding like this because, my balls hadn't descended yet. But I grew up with a full thick Scouse accent, and my two little sisters have got really thick Scouse accents in what I call sung Scouse, which has a little rhythm to it. What you think you're doing? Like that, basically. The reason I don't have that is because I'm only 40 minutes away from Liverpool now. Like I still have an L postcode. I'm getting very close to doxing myself here. My postcode still starts with an L. It's still a Liverpool postcode. And basically, like I moved up to Southport, and that's full on doxing where I used to live. If I say the name of the village I live in a village with like 6 people. So it's like, I'm either doxing me or my next door neighbour or the hotel or whatever. But when I moved to Southport, I just spent the whole of like 4 years in high school getting bullied for like various reasons in a Liverpool school. And the only thing that anyone picked on me for really, or commented on in this new school, was my accent. And because I had a Scouse accent and a shaved head, so nobody bullied me in that school. Everyone was scared of me. I know. And but I wanted to fit in. And actually, this is a very nice thing to say about when it comes to values. I didn't want to fit in. I wanted to belong, but I didn't know what belonging meant. So I'll adapt things. So so basically, it made swearing really crap because obviously, you know, the good old F word. It's got 17 Ks on the end of it if you're a Scouser. So and Lancashire accents, we drop the end of words. So like something that's shit is shit. That's a bit shit, isn't it? You don't need the T is very, very like, you know, it's like, oh, it's a bit shit, that, isn't it? It's like there's no strong T. And then the thing is, I go back to Liverpool, and my friends over there call me a wool, which is like short for woolly back, which basically means anyone in the surrounding areas, mostly St. Helens. And yeah, I did the same thing because again, I was like, right, I was picked on for my intelligence in my first school. So what did I do? I started acting the class clown and basically did my homework on my own. Then I was picked on for being fat. Okay, admittedly, I didn't counteract that one. I just carried on putting on weight and just ate, because snacks are delicious, you know. But then in the third school, when I was there, and like the first sign of being picked on for anything was the accent, and I just thought, you know what, I'm dropping that. So I started talking a little bit more like that. Although it's possibly been a benefit for me because it means I have a slightly less obvious accent when I'm presenting and I spend a lot of time talking. Oof, and rightly or wrongly, some people are put off by a Scouse accent. So
there's definitely accent prejudice, right? Yeah. So, you know, no matter where you live in the world, obviously there are stereotypes that exist, both, you know, whether you're in the United States. I spent a lot of time living in Asia, in South Korea, and like my grandmother's Japanese. So, you know, like I know a lot about like those specific like regional issues and things like that. And I think that no matter where you live, right, there's always, even within your own language, within your own sort of like subset, that there's always going to be a way to differentiate between us and them. And an accent is one of the most obvious ways to do it, aside from just physical appearances. So it's what you look like and what you sound like, because those are the things that you can know right off the bat. And it allows us to create otherness between ourselves and different groups. And so, yeah, accent, I mean, this is where like, let me just talk about some sociology. Let me just, and I'm like, wait, don't take over.
Just keep going.
Don't hijack this.
That's fine.
But yeah, I was like, oh God, does Nate need to go? He was like, no, normally like 20 minutes.
I'm still streaming for another 90 minutes, you know.
Fantastic. Yeah. We're here for it. Okay, we're here for it. Okay, so I think
overtime, people.
You're getting some extra content today.
Yes, I love
That's
it.
What we're
Keep
getting.
Going.
So being a political scientist, one of the things that I look at specifically, because political science covers a broad spectrum of things. It's not just politics. And for me, I specialize in international relations, specifically security studies and security issues. But within the security studies realm, there are obviously a myriad of different disciplines. And one of the things that I look at specifically, especially in my later work, is basically issues around human security, right? And so one of the main things that comes into play there is basically looking at how sociology applies in political science. Sociology, you know, anything from anthropology, and you're pulling all of these different ways that we understand and construct our reality. As a political scientist, I'm admittedly a constructivist. that's a whole nother subject. But basically what it means is that rather than believing that the world is inherently one way or inherently another way, that we are all constructing the world that we live in mutually based on the system that we exist within, and that we also help create that system, and that it's in a way a reinforcing positive feedback loop, right? So that our context...
I'm one of them too. I didn't know it until now, but that sounds like me. So
yeah, you're like, check. Yeah,
yeah.
It's literally exactly what it sounds like. That constructivism is largely that we are personally constructing the world around us, creating and reinforcing our own paradigms, but also that we are influenced by the systems that we exist within, and we have to acknowledge that as well. Yeah. So all of that is just preface for this. But when it comes to looking at political science generally, it breaks down into such small micros that are essential to understand in order to understand the macro. And one of those things is understanding how we group and categorize ourselves as humans, right? So we talk about our hierarchy of needs, but there's also basically a hierarchy of understanding. So apply it the same way, where one is kind of based on another. So if you start, there are basically two types of societies, and I'm not going to get into that, just accept that what I'm saying is. And then if you were to start at your base principle, how do you understand the world, right? Starting from yourself, the individual unit, maybe graduating up into a family unit. It doesn't necessarily have to be a biological family unit. It could be found family, it could be adopted family, but your next basically most immediate circle, right? And then moving beyond that, and this is all just kind of basic sociology stuff. Moving up beyond that, what is your next circle, right? What's your next context, right? That might be the village that you're from, right? It might be the religion that you're part of. It might be the town, right? That is over you, the city. It might be your race. It might be your, and gender is a little bit different, but it might be your race. Until you get up to the macro, which might be your state or national identity, right? And then very few of us kind of graduate anything beyond that. We just, no one's like, there are people, but they're fewer and far between people who then graduate beyond that sort of state identity, right? So am I someone beyond my passport? Am I a global citizen? But that ultimately in political science, that's what we ask for people to start looking at the world as, is move beyond this hierarchy of understanding of your identity, and that our identity is built on each of these different pieces. And it's just about how each of those different pieces influence from the top down, because they do, but they also go from the top up. So everything is mutually constructed. Okay, so now that we've cleared that up, I'm still on point. It's okay. I got it. Excellent. Yeah, this is the thing. You're smart, so I know that I can have this conversation, because this is the thing. People are like, Khryse plays games, and I'm like, no, games are the catalyst for these types of conversations, because look at the games I play. It is all over the map, and it's just really about what can we talk about as we're playing, and it's often we get to stuff like this all the time. Okay, so when it comes to understanding us versus others, right? And this comes back to the prejudice that people experience at all levels. It's that how is someone else different from me, right? And when we experience these prejudices, whether it be based on our skin color, whether it be based on our gender identity, whether it be based on our sexual preference, whether it be based on anything from color of our skin to the sound of our voice, to whether you are religious or non-religious, it's just about the fact that people are categorizing you based on otherness. Yes. How different are you from all of these other people? And that's how then we go around understanding the world and placing those things in a hierarchy, right? So our self-conception is really going to be, okay, how can I know who I am unless I understand myself from a relational point of view as being different from someone else? Right. So if I say, I am this, but I'm also not that. Right. Yeah. And so I personally find, obviously, prejudice of any sort just absolutely detestable. And when it comes to like understanding those sorts of things, it's because that hierarchy sits on top of and camouflages what's ultimately underneath, which is the individual and the individual's intrinsic value. Right. Those become layers of of essentially clothing, if you want to think about it that way, that are presented on the outside of the person, but in any way don't tell you about what's on the inside of that person whatsoever, really, from a very base point of view. It tells you who they are. It tells you things about them. It tells you things about how they have been constructed by the world and in the world, but their intrinsic value, just as another individual, as a separate entity other than yourself, those are things that people either use to strip away your value, to define your value, to assign value based on how like them you are. And it's so difficult, because when we talk about accent prejudice, people laugh because take, for example, in comedy routines or on the television, we all know the BBC voice, right? It's unless you're watching a regional news program, how often do you hear people who don't have the BBC voice? Like, you just don't. And then when you are, watching a comedy program, they often cast certain archetypes of characters with certain accents.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I guarantee you that not everyone from that region is going to be this archetype, and it's damaging to say that this trope is all that there is, especially if that trope is damaging, right? And it's a bit problematic for one reason or another. So for example, people always think that everyone from the Southwest is an idiot, drunk, cider pisshead. Like, I don't know. That doesn't know what I hear.
And some of them like beer, okay?
A few of them are beer drinkers, but like ultimately this is cider country. They just think that we've all been hit on the head with too many apples or whatever, and that's all there is, right?
There's a place called Pipeline Brewing near, it's very good, in the Southwest.
It was like, by the way, if any of you are there...
If anyone wants to, I'll be there in about 6 hours. No,
you're like, I can make it. Let's get on the train. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm a big fan of Thatcher's cider. I think that cider is delicious. But also, like, there is just so much more here than cider country. Like, obviously, there's the problematic past of the Southwest and its relationship to the slave trade and obviously the economics and the finances of that. But the reality is that the Southwest was critical in many ways, just as the North's manufacturing was critical in many ways. So, you can't always just completely be like, nope, the Southwest is full of bumbling idiots. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, we're a bunch of thieving scousers is what we are. It's like, and I never nicked nothing from no one, I'll have you know, which is a triple negative, which means I didn't. So
yeah, exactly.
But yeah, but it is, as you say, but it's about this, it's that othering, isn't it? It's like that in-group thinking versus out-group thinking. And it's the weirdest thing I kind of, and this would be an entire over hour to discuss this point, is the question is are we always going to have that? It might not always be about race, it might not always be about religion, but there is always a them and us. And even if we think about, like, in mental health communities, we're empathetic and understanding in the mental health community to anybody else that comes into the mental health community and is suffering. But with someone who comes in and says, you're not, they don't fit our narrative, like, you're faking it or you're doing this. It's like, do we show that person empathy and understanding? Not really. It's like, usually we kind of jump down that person's throat and accuse them of not, it's like, and that's the thing is, I was chatting to someone about this before the stream today, because I said, that's my big thing about our stream, is I want our stream to be like a welcoming to absolutely everybody. And if we do get people who are anti-mental health, is actually, I want to sit and have a compassionate conversation with that person, because I they may never be in our group because they may never suffer from mental health, and cool, I don't want them to suffer from the mental health in order to be in our group. That'd be a very weird thing to want for somebody. But you create more allies that way. Like, you create more allies by understanding and educating, and by saying they are the other, therefore they just don't get it, they'll never get it because X, Y, and Z. And I do wonder about that, like, especially like one of the I know Trusted Beard's in the chat right now, and I was I was on their show on Sunday, and they sent me a list of potential questions, and there was one that I was looking forward to, but hoping that wouldn't come up at the same time. It didn't come up in the end, though. It was like, in a world where everything's so divided, how do we find some similarity? And I was just like, oh, maybe if I get asked that question in the moment, something will roll off my head. But thinking about it going in, I'm like, I'm not sure. Like, is there always going to be a them and us? And the only thing I can say is the fact that people are like, oh, well, you know, should we accept that we're all, like when you say being a global citizen, right? Should we accept that we're all the same? Or do we accept that everyone's an individual? And I'm like, yes. It's like we are all the same. Like, yeah, we start off with, we are all the same race. We are 7.5 billion people that are all the same and are all individual. And it's like when we get rid of we have to get rid of an either or if we want to actually, you know, ever make it one group, and accept that within that 7.5 billion people. Is it more than that? I may have just wiped 500 million people off the planet by accident. I don't know. It's about 7.5 billion. But like, it's like, yes, both. It's like, is a person with a different color of skin than me the same or different to me? Yes. They are the same as they are human, but they are different because they have a different heritage, a different background, a completely different story as to where they have, and they are a different person. Is a person with the exact same skin color the same or different as me? Yes. You know, is a person the same gender as me, same or different? Both. Is a person that's the different gender from me, the same or different? Both. Is a person who's twice my age the same or different? Yes. You know, it's like, I think that's what we need to actually move towards, but I don't know how the hell we do that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. I think it's difficult because the paradigm that we exist in doesn't allow for that paradox. Right. And I think that for me, that's one of the hardest things, is because you have to, and not in the Orwellian sense, like hold both things to be true simultaneously, because they're not contradictory. Right. Yeah. These two things can exist simultaneously. So like for me, when I use the clothing example, if you're wearing all of these layers, what we are seeing in the other isn't necessarily better or worse. It's just different. And I think that the problem is that when we are looking at it, let's just say your otherness looks like you're covered in Nike and my otherness looks like I'm covered in Hollister. Like, I don't know. It's just different. But if in the same way, then people said, yes, but you're that grubby kid at school because your otherness is somehow cheaper than mine, is less than mine, is not worth as much as mine, that's problematic.
Yes.
And so I think that is the hurdle, right, that we have to overcome, is that I feel like that there are plenty of people who are willing and able to acknowledge that there is both otherness and sameness simultaneously, and that they don't cancel each other out, and they're not here to contradict one another, but it's that the otherness is not inherently less than. And I think that needs to be the change that occurs, is that different isn't dangerous. Different doesn't mean less than. And I think for me personally, that's what I often try to communicate, is that when there are people who, like you were saying, might not be as empathetic with your community, even though they are sympathetic with the community, that helping people understand that this person who's doesn't have the same lived experience as them is not less than just because they've not had that experience, that they're trying to understand, they're wanting to sympathize, they're wanting to be part of it. And that would also help make them part of the solution. If you exclude them, you could potentially make them part of the problem. And having been in several, not that I have one myself, but I'm part of several mental health communities. I don't normally participate, but I'm one of those people who just observes. Mm-hmm. I observe everything. And it can, it's one of those things, right? Look, I clock it. And so if people are doing and saying stuff where I'm like, no, that's actually not helpful. I think that the onus is often put on the person who doesn't have the lived experience. But I often find that they're the ones who are trying to understand and ask the questions, so that way they can be a better ally. Now, obviously, there are going to be better and worse ways of doing that. And that if they need to essentially be educated on how to ask the questions more appropriately, how to be involved more appropriately, that's like a separate conversation. Right. Because obviously there are 100% problematic people. But I think that if we're excluding people based on their otherness, because they don't share our lived experience, because they aren't basically clothed in the same cloak of experience, the cloak of, I've always called it the cloak of context, but I didn't want it to be too cheesy.
That's not cheesy. That works.
Yeah, so I've always called it the cloak of context. So if someone else is wearing a different cloak than you and you exclude them based on that, to me, that's just as problematic. And so it's like, well, the person is there and, you know, she wants to understand and they want to ask questions, or maybe he's really, you know, trying to get a better grasp on what something just is, you know, as far as just like an actual definition of something. Excluding anyone who's asking those questions, even if they are difficult, simply because, oh, you won't understand. My God, calm down on the melodrama and increase the education. That's what we need, right?
Yeah.
You know, we want to increase the amount of inclusion, increase the amount of education, develop conversations that are meaningful and productive. And you can't do that if you exclude people based on otherness, even if you think that you're doing the right thing. Because again, who is that right for?
Exactly. But as we say, that is definitely another hour's worth of conversation. It's
Won't you?
We'll do it. We'll definitely do it. Where's the best place? We've literally just coming up in chat actually right now. Where's the best place for people to find out more about you? Go and check your stream out, or check out, where'd you like to be contacted on social media, if anywhere? I like to be followed, but contact me at your own peril.
I mean, fair point. I have a Twitter, guys. Everything is at Khryseis0529. The spelling is up in the shout out in chat. I pretty much use my Twitter and Instagram kind of like a personal one, because I didn't really have a lot of like personal socials before I started gaming and stuff. But I do stream on Twitch twice a week. You guys are all welcome. I do play video games. I do first playthroughs. And we have a lot of kind of big conversations around like themes, motifs, the music involved. I mean, everything. I'm very chatty and active. Dave can tell you. And so
it's true.
Yeah, I try to be very involved. But I play everything from indies to AAAs. But pretty much all I ever do is I don't want to use the term, but previously the term was blind playthroughs, which was as in you've had no spoilers, you don't know anything about the game, and you're having a first experience. Those are now categorized as a first playthrough. And so that's what I do over on my Twitch channel. You can also find me at Khryseis0529 here on Twitch, Twitter, or Instagram. And you can feel free to reach out to me in any of those locales. I do have a Discord. And I stream in there as well occasionally.
I was going to say, nobody knows their Discord link, though, do they?
Yeah, nobody knows their Discord link.
Mine is discord.gg something, and I can't remember. And they're case sensitive as well.
Yeah,
letters and numbers. Case sensitive.
Yeah, letters and numbers. So I would just say, if you guys want to come spend some more time with me, if you guys want to get to know me, you can follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Instagram is mostly cute pictures of me, my dog, or where I live. It's not really that special. I'm not really a content creator, so be warned. I'm a streamer. I'm a conversationalist, and that's what I kind of prefer to, I guess, Twitch identify as, is just I don't produce on other platforms or anything like that. So if you want to come hang out with me, you can follow me on Twitter. Come hang out with me on Twitch. I stream twice a week on Wednesdays and Fridays at 8 p.m. Greenwich Meridian time. So that's here in the UK. That's 3 p.m. Eastern time. And I would love to see you guys.
Amazing.